As the temperature drops, a lot of people who become fascinated with bluebirds wonder if they migrate. This is especially true right after nesting season when they all suddenly seem to temporarily disappear. Fortunately, for a large portion of the United States, eastern bluebirds are year-round residents. However, populations breeding in the northern regions of North America will migrate to southern parts. So the brief answer to whether or not bluebirds migrate is yes and no. Like many other thrushes, eastern bluebirds are considered partial migrators, and whether individuals or populations will travel south depends partly on preference and breeding location. But there are other factors to consider when it comes to eastern bluebird migration. For instance, what drives them to migrate in the first place? When do they come and when do they leave? And how do they know when it's time to migrate? And how far do they even travel? Migration is very dangerous. Think about it. You're traveling a great distance where you will encounter many predators, many uncertainties, the elements, and also have to compete with other bird populations. So there has to be some very good reasons to take on this journey. For eastern bluebirds, weather is certainly a factor, which is why populations breeding in northern areas are more likely to travel south. But aside from environmental and weather, another huge factor is what resources are available. Let's start with migrating north for breeding ground. What will drive them to extend their reach so far in the first place? One factor is territory. Bluebirds are very territorial come breeding time. Bluebird landlords are advised to space nest boxes at least 100 yards apart, and even then some have observed fighting. Finding mates and food are other reasons to push northward or expand into new territories. Come late fall, northern territories are not going to be as hospitable. Frozen water and bugs buried in the frozen ground make most vital resources pretty scarce. Fortunately, eastern bluebirds often band together in winter flocks, which means it's less problematic to interact with other bluebirds and travel south. Interestingly, researchers studying bluebirds have found that it's not temperature that signals bluebirds when to migrate. Instead, it's something more constant: photoperiod. In this context, photoperiod is the hours the sun will shine in the day. As the days grow shorter, migrating birds are signaled to travel south, and when breeding period starts back up and the days grow longer, those who have northern breeding territory will likely head northward again. That's not to say weather and temperature don't have any influence on migration. Populations traveling a longer distance may forage in areas longer if the weather remains mild, and then move when the weather gets colder. Ultimately, with light being a more unchanging factor influencing migration, researchers have found northern populations will head back up north for breeding as early as late February and into early April. This also depends on where their northern territory is located. Bluebird migration distance varies among populations. However, there is record of bluebirds breeding in Manitoba, Canada, and wintering in central Texas. This would be a distance of 2,100 kilometers or about 1,300 miles. What's also interesting about bluebird migration and distance is that researchers believe they perform what's called leapfrog migration. When playing leapfrog, one person crouches down while another hops over them. And this is a good analogy for how bluebirds and other thrushes are thought to migrate. In this case, northern birds traveling south won't migrate in a gradient form, roosting and taking up vacated sites of other migrating birds. Instead, they will migrate over other resident bluebird populations in a leapfrog manner. This type of behavior also styles them as short-distance migrators, which is true when comparing their migration behavior to tree swallows or hummingbirds. Even though your bluebirds may not be leaving for the winter, if you're in the Midwest or in other southern regions, you might be getting some migrating visitors, and not just eastern bluebirds, but several other migrating bird species. When it does come to bluebirds wintering in your yard, it's really going to be hard to distinguish your resident bluebirds from migrating populations. An older study taking place in Michigan followed about 300 eastern bluebirds. Of the 300, 61 had known histories that could be studied, and of the 61, 18 remained year-round while the other 43 had migrated into the study area for the breeding season. Since it's not really easy to tell who's who, a better option is to make sure your yard is ready for wintering flocks, not just eastern bluebirds, but other seasonal birds you might not have thought about. A few ways to ready your yard is to make sure there's always water available. In the winter time, a heated bird bath or a bird bath heater can make a huge difference by keeping the water from freezing over. And this will also attract a lot of birds to your yard as well. I'll have some links below for options. Another way to help your wintering cavity birds is to keep your nest boxes up. Always make sure you're not letting invasive birds like European starlings or old world sparrows like house sparrows use your nest boxes. But downy woodpeckers, bluebirds, and chickadees will definitely enjoy the warmth and protection of a nest box on colder nights. And multiple bluebirds will even roost in the nest box on very cold nights. Another thing to do is ensure you're providing protein-packed food. Eastern bluebirds will want to stick to live mealworm, but other bird species will visit your feeder for nuts and berries. I'll have a link in the description for some options. Just be sure to avoid seed blends with filler seed like cracked corn and millet. Lastly, if you really start getting into birding, we encourage you to plant berry plants that fruit in the late fall and winter. Inkberry, arrowwood, and winterberry are some great options. I'll also post a link to our article about migration, which also has a helpful table of berrying plants to consider.